The wagon wheel splintered with a crack so loud it sent a flock of ravens screaming into the copper sky, and Zelda Coleman felt her heart drop into her stomach as the whole contraption lurched sideways like a dying animal. She gripped the wooden seat hard enough to send splinters into her palms, her father's old trunk sliding dangerously close to the edge of the wagon bed. The two horses whinnied and stamped, confused by the sudden stop, and dust rose around them in thick clouds that made her cough. She was 3 days out from Santa Fe, New Mexico territory, heading toward what was supposed to be a new life in Lone Pine. And now she was stranded in the middle of nowhere with a broken wheel, the sun beating down mercilessly, and not another soul in sight for what looked like miles of scrubland and scattered juniper trees. Zelda climbed down carefully, her boots hitting the hard, packed earth with a thud. She was 22 years old, had buried her father 6 months ago, and had spent the last of her savings on this wagon, these horses, and supplies to start fresh where nobody knew her as the daughter of a drunk who gambled away everything they owned. Her dark blonde hair was tied back with a faded blue ribbon, and her calico dress was already stained with road dust despite her best efforts. She walked around to examine the damage and felt her stomach sink further. The wheel had not just broken, it had shattered. 3 spokes were completely gone, and the rim had cracked in 2 places. Even if she had the tools and knowledge to fix it, which she did not, there was no salvaging this wheel. She would need a replacement, and the nearest town was at least a day's ride away. She pressed her hands to her face and tried not to cry. Crying would not fix anything. Crying was what weak women did in novels, and she had promised herself she was done being weak. But standing there in the middle of the New Mexico territory, with the sun climbing higher and no plan, she felt pretty damn weak indeed. The sound of hoofbeats made her spin around, one hand instinctively going to the rifle she kept in the wagon. A single rider was approaching from the east, moving at an easy canter. As he got closer, Zelda could make out more details. He sat tall in the saddle, wore a brown hat that had seen better days, and had a blue bandana tied around his neck. His horse was a sturdy-looking paint, and there were saddlebags and a bedroll tied behind him. He looked like he had been on the trail for a while. The rider slowed as he approached, raising one hand in a gesture of peace. Zelda kept her hand near the wagon, near the rifle, just in case. You could not be too careful out here. She had heard enough stories about what happened to women alone on the frontier. "Morning, miss," the cowboy called out when he was close enough. His voice was deep but friendly, with a slight drawl that spoke of Texas origins. "Looks like you have got yourself some trouble there." Up close, Zelda could see he was young, maybe 25 or 26, with tanned skin and light brown hair that curled slightly under his hat. He had green eyes that crinkled at the corners like he smiled often, and a strong jaw covered with a few days' worth of stubble. He was handsome in that rough, weathered way that men got when they spent most of their time outdoors. "My wheel broke," Zelda said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I do not suppose you know anything about wagon repair." The cowboy swung down from his horse with easy grace and walked over to examine the damage. He crouched down, turning the pieces of the wheel over in his hands, his expression thoughtful. "Well, this is not going anywhere as is," he said after a moment. "But I think I can help you out. Name is Gabriel Lawson, by the way. Most folks call me Gabe." "Zelda Coleman," she replied, relaxing slightly. There was something genuinely kind in his expression, nothing predatory or threatening. "And I would be very grateful for any help. I am heading to Lone Pine, and I'm afraid I do not have much experience with wagon repairs." Gabe stood up and tipped his hat back, surveying the situation. "Lone Pine, huh? That is where I am heading to. Small world." Now, Here is the thing about this wheel. The rim is cracked and you have lost too many spokes to patch it up proper. But I have got some rope and tools, and if you have got a spare wheel or even some strong wood, I might be able to jury-rig something to get you the rest of the way to town. It will not be pretty, but it should hold. Zelda felt a rush of relief so strong it made her knees weak. I have some planks in the back. My father was a carpenter before he passed. I kept some of his better wood. I am sorry for your loss, Gabe said, and he sounded like he meant it. Let me take a look at what you have got, and we will see what we can do. For the next 2 hours, Zelda watched as Gabe worked with steady, capable hands. He measured and cut and fitted, talking to himself under his breath as he worked through problems. She helped where she could, holding pieces in place or fetching tools from his saddlebags. He had a whole traveling workshop in there, she realized. Hammers and nails, a small saw, coils of rope and wire, even a leather-working kit. You carry a lot of supplies, she observed as she handed him a length of rope. Gabe grinned, wiping sweat from his forehead. I am a ranch hand by trade, but I do a bit of everything. Learned early on that it pays to be prepared. My daddy used to say a man who can fix things will never go hungry, and he was right about that. I have worked on ranches from Texas to Colorado, doing whatever needs doing. Fixing fences, breaking horses, building barns. If it needs doing, I have probably tried it at least once. That must be an interesting life, Zelda said, genuinely curious. Always moving from place to place. He paused in his work, his expression growing more thoughtful. It has its moments, gets lonely sometimes though. No roots, no real home. That is part of why I am heading to Lone Pine. Got a job offer at a ranch there, and the owner said if I work hard, he might make me foreman in a year or two. Figure it is time to settle down, put down those roots. There was something wistful in his voice that made Zelda's heart ache a little. She understood that feeling, that yearning for a place to belong. It was why she was making this journey too. By the time the sun reached its peak, Gabe had fashioned a replacement wheel that looked nothing like the original but seemed solid enough. He had used her father's planks to create new spokes, reinforced with rope and wire, and had somehow attached the whole thing to the axle in a way that looked like it might actually work. There, he said, standing back to admire his handiwork. Like I said, it is not pretty, but it should get you to Lone Pine. Just take it slow and try to avoid any big ruts or rocks if you can help it. Zelda felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they were from gratitude. I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Lawson. You have probably saved my life. Can I pay you? I do not have much, but I have a little money left. Gabe shook his head firmly. No, madam. I would not feel right taking money from a lady in distress. Consider it a welcome to New Mexico territory. He paused, then added with a slight smile. Though I would not say no to some company on the road to Lone Pine if you are amenable. It is safer to travel in numbers out here, and I would feel better knowing that we'll made it all the way to town. Zelda nodded, feeling a warmth spread through her chest that had nothing to do with the heat. I would appreciate that very much. And please call me Zelda. After you just spent half the day fixing my wagon, I think we are past formalities. They watered the horses from Zelda's supply and shared some jerky and hard biscuits for lunch. As they ate, they talked, and Zelda found herself opening up in a way she rarely did with strangers. Maybe it was the isolation of the desert, or maybe it was something about Gabe's easy manner. But she found herself telling him about her father, about the debts she had paid off, about her hope to start a dressmaking business in Lone Pine. I am good with a needle, she explained, brushing crumbs from her skirt. And I figure a growing town always needs someone who can make decent clothes. I am not looking to get rich, just to make an honest living and have a place of my own. Gabe listened attentively, his green eyes focused on her face. That sounds like a fine plan. Lone Pine is growing from what I hear. The silver mine brought in a lot of people, and where there are people, there is need for all sorts of services. I bet you will do real well. I hope so, Zelda said softly. I am tired of scraping by, of being afraid all the time. I want something stable, something that is mine. I understand that, Gabe said. More than you know. They set out again in the early afternoon, Gabe riding alongside the wagon on his paint horse. True to his word, the repaired wheel held, though it creaked ominously whenever they hit an uneven patch of ground. They kept to a slow, steady pace, and as they traveled, they continued to talk. Gabe told her stories about his time on various ranches, about the time he helped deliver a breech foal in the middle of a lightning storm, about the ranch in Colorado where he had spent a whole winter snowed in with nothing but books and a cranky old cook for company. Learned to play chess that winter, he said with a laugh. Old Cookie beat me probably 100 times before I finally won a game, but I learned patience, I will tell you that much. Zelda found herself laughing more than she had in months. There was something about Gabe that made her feel lighter, like the weight she had been carrying was not quite so heavy. He was easy to talk to, and more than that, he listened. Really listened, not just waiting for his turn to speak. She told him about growing up in Santa Fe, about her mother who had died when she was young, about the garden she used to keep before her father sold the house to pay gambling debts. I miss growing things, she admitted as they passed a scraggly juniper. There is something satisfying about putting a seed in the ground and watching it become something beautiful. Maybe you can have a garden in Lone Pine, Gabe suggested. Even a small one. A few herbs and vegetables, some flowers, does not take much space. Maybe, Zelda said, allowing herself to imagine it. A small house with a garden out back, tomatoes and beans and squash, maybe some roses by the door. It sounded like paradise. As the sun began to sink toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they came to a small creek lined with cottonwood trees. Gabe suggested they camp there for the night. It was still another full day to Lone Pine, and it would be foolish to travel in the dark. They set up camp together with practiced efficiency. Gabe tended to the horses while Zelda gathered wood for a fire. She had a small pot and some supplies, and she put together a simple stew with beans and some of the vegetables she had packed in her wagon. It was not fancy, but it was hot and filling, and Gabe praised it like it was a feast. "This is the best thing I have eaten in weeks," he said, scraping his bowl clean. "You have got a talent for cooking." Zelda felt herself blush. "It is just beans and vegetables, nothing special." "Maybe, but you made it taste special. That is a gift." They sat by the fire as darkness fell, the stars emerging one by one until the sky was full of them. The desert night was cold compared to the scorching day, and Zelda wrapped herself in a blanket. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and the horses shifted nervously until Gabe spoke to them in a low, soothing voice. "You ever get scared?" Zelda asked after a long moment of comfortable silence. "Out here alone, I mean, traveling by yourself." Gabe considered the question, staring into the fire. "Sometimes," he admitted. "Not so much of the physical dangers, though those are real enough. More of the loneliness, I guess. Of wondering if I am wasting my life drifting from place to place. Of thinking maybe I will never find where I am supposed to be." "That is exactly how I have been feeling," Zelda said softly. "Like I am looking for something, but I do not quite know what it is." Gabe turned to look at her, and in the firelight, his eyes were warm. "Maybe that is why we ran into each other today. Maybe we are both supposed to find it in Lone Pine." Zelda's heart did a strange little flip in her chest. She realized with a start that she was attracted to this cowboy, this kind stranger who had stopped to help her without expecting anything in return. It was more than just his handsome face, though that certainly did not hurt. It was the way he listened when she spoke, the way he treated her like an equal, the way he looked at her like she was someone worth knowing. "Maybe," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Gabe told her about losing his parents to fever when he was 16, about raising his younger sister until she got married and moved to California. Zelda told him about the shame of her father's addiction, about the neighbors who had whispered and judged. They talked about books and music and what they hoped for in the future. "I want a family someday," Gabe said, poking at the fire with a stick. "A wife and kids, a home that is really mine. I want to teach my children to ride and work hard and be kind. I want to build something that lasts." "That sounds wonderful," Zelda said. "I want that too. A family, I mean. People who choose to be with me, not because they are stuck with me, but because they want to be." "Someone is going to be very lucky to have you," Gabe said, and there was something in his tone that made Zelda's pulse quicken. "You too," she managed to say. They finally settled down to sleep, Gabe insisting that Zelda take the wagon while he rolled out his bedroll near the fire. Zelda lay awake for a long time, listening to the crackle of the dying fire and the sound of Gabe's steady breathing. She felt safer than she had in years, and that realization both thrilled and terrified her. She barely knew this man, yet somehow he had slipped past all her defenses in the span of a single day. The next morning dawned clear and bright. They broke camp quickly, both eager to reach Lone Pine. As they traveled, the landscape gradually began to change. The flat scrubland gave way to rolling hills dotted with pinyon pines. They passed a stagecoach heading in the opposite direction, and the driver tipped his hat to them. Signs of civilization grew more frequent. A fence line here, a distant cabin there, wheel ruts in the road that spoke of regular traffic. By mid-afternoon, they crested a hill and saw Lone Pine spread out in the valley below. It was bigger than Zelda had expected, with a proper main street lined with wooden buildings, several side streets branching off, and houses scattered around the outskirts. She could see a church steeple, what looked like a two-story hotel, and smoke rising from various chimneys. Beyond the town, she could make out the dark mouth of the silver mine and the various structures surrounding it. "There it is," Gabe said, a note of satisfaction in his voice. "Our new home, our new home." The words made Zelda's heart race. She glanced at Gabe and found him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. Hope, maybe, mixed with something warmer. They rode into Lone Pine as the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty street. People went about their business, loading wagons, tending to horses, carrying parcels. A few folks looked up curiously at the newcomers, but no one seemed particularly interested. It was the kind of town where strangers were common enough not to cause a stir. Gabe pulled his horse up in front of a building with a sign that read Murphy's General Store. "I should check in at the ranch, let them know I have arrived," he said. "But I would like to make sure you are settled first. Do you have a place to stay?" Zelda shook her head. "I plan to find a boarding house and look for a place to rent tomorrow." "There is a decent boarding house run by a woman named Mrs. Patterson, right across from the hotel," Gabe said, pointing down the street. "She is fair with her prices, from what I have heard. Let me help you get your wagon there." They made their way to the boarding house, a neat white building with green shutters and a small porch. A stout woman in her 50s came out as they pulled up, wiping her hands on her apron. "New arrivals?" she asked cheerfully. "I am Dorothy Patterson. Welcome to Lone Pine." "Thank you, madam," Zelda said, climbing down from the wagon. I am Zelda Coleman, and I am hoping you might have a room available. Just so happens I do, Mrs. Patterson said. Nice room on the second floor, gets good morning light. $3 a week, includes breakfast and dinner. Lunch is extra if you want it. It was more than Zelda wanted to spend, but she nodded. That sounds fine. I will probably need it for a few weeks until I can find something more permanent. You planning to stay in Lone Pine, Mrs. Patterson asked, looking pleased. Yes, madam. I am a seamstress. I'm hoping to start a business here. Well, that is wonderful. We could certainly use a good seamstress. The only person who does any real sewing around here is Martha Collins, and she is getting on in years, poor dear. Her eyesight is not what it used to be. As Mrs. Patterson and Zelda discussed arrangements, Gabe unloaded the trunk from the wagon and carried it up to the room that would be Zelda's. It was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. He set the trunk down carefully and turned to find Zelda standing in the doorway, looking uncertain. Well, he said, suddenly feeling awkward. I guess this is where I leave you. I should get out to the ranch before it gets too late. Of course, Zelda said quickly. And thank you again, Gabe. For everything. I do not know what I would have done without you. Gabe shifted his weight, his hat in his hands. He knew he should go, but he found himself reluctant to leave. In just a day and a half, this woman had come to mean something to him. He enjoyed her company, her quick wit, her quiet strength. He did not want this to be goodbye. Zelda, he said, then paused, gathering his courage. I know we only just met, and maybe this is too forward, but I would like to see you again. Properly, I mean. Would you allow me to court you? Zelda's eyes went wide, and for a horrible moment, Gabe thought he had misread everything, that he had made a terrible mistake. But then a smile spread across her face, bright and genuine. Yes, she said simply. I would like that very much. Relief and joy flooded through Gabe in equal measure. Really? You mean it? I mean it, Zelda said, stepping closer. You are a good man, Gabe Lawson, and I would be honored to have you court me. Gabe felt like he might float right off the ground. I will come by on Sunday after church if that suits you. Maybe we could take a walk, have lunch. That sounds perfect. They stood there grinning at each other like fools until Mrs. Patterson's voice floated up from downstairs, asking if everything was all right. That broke the spell, and Gabe reluctantly headed for the door. Sunday then, he said. Sunday, Zelda agreed. Gabe practically floated back to his horse. As he rode out of town toward the Rusty Spur Ranch where he would be working, he could not stop smiling. He had come to Lone Pine looking for a job and a fresh start, and he had found that and so much more. He had found Zelda. The next few days passed in a blur for both of them. Gabe arrived at the Rusty Spur and was put to work immediately. The ranch was bigger than he had expected, with hundreds of head of cattle and a dozen hands. The owner, a gruff but fair man named Tom Morrison, seemed pleased with Gabe's work ethic and experience. He assigned Gabe to mending fences on the north pasture, hard work but nothing Gabe could not handle. At night, lying in the bunkhouse listening to the other hands snore, Gabe thought about Zelda. He wondered what she was doing, if she was settling in all right, if she was thinking about him too. Sunday seemed impossibly far away. Zelda, meanwhile, was busy making herself known in town. She visited Martha Collins, the older seamstress Mrs. Patterson had mentioned, and the two women hit it off immediately. Martha was delighted to hear that Zelda planned to set up shop, and she even offered to refer customers once her own workload got too heavy. My hands are not what they used to be, Martha said, showing Zelda her gnarled fingers. Arthritis, the doctor says. Some days I can barely hold a needle. It will be nice knowing there is someone younger to take over when I finally retire. Zelda also visited the bank to inquire about renting a small storefront. The banker, A thin man with spectacles named Mr. Pearson showed her a space on Main Street that had recently become available. It was perfect, a small room with big windows and enough space for a work table and a few displays. The rent was reasonable, and Mr. Pearson seemed impressed with her business plan. "We will need a deposit and first month's rent," he said, "and a letter of reference if you have one." Zelda's heart sank. She had the money for the deposit and rent, but a letter of reference. Who could she ask? She had burned most of her bridges in Santa Fe, people who had known her father and judged her by his failings. As if reading her mind, Mr. Pearson added, "Or perhaps someone local who can vouch for your character, someone established in the community." Zelda thought immediately of Gabe, but he was as new to town as she was. Then she remembered Mrs. Patterson. "Would the owner of the boarding house where I am staying be sufficient?" Mr. Pearson nodded. "Mrs. Patterson is well respected. If she will vouch for you, that would be fine." Mrs. Patterson not only vouched for Zelda, but sang her praises, telling Mr. Pearson that Zelda was responsible and hardworking, and exactly the kind of person Lone Pine needed. By the end of the week, Zelda had signed the lease and had the keys to her very own shop. She spent Saturday cleaning and organizing, moving in the small amount of furniture she had bought secondhand. It was not much, just a table, 2 chairs, and some shelves, but it was hers. She hung a sign in the window that read Coleman's Dressmaking and stood back to admire it. For the first time since her father died, she felt like she was building something real. Sunday morning arrived bright and cool. Zelda dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep blue cotton that brought out her eyes and pinned her hair up neatly. She attended services at the small wooden church, sitting in the back and trying to concentrate on the sermon instead of thinking about Gabe. She was not entirely successful. When church let out, Gabe was waiting outside, looking scrubbed and nervous in clean clothes. His hair was neatly combed and he had shaved. Zelda's heart did that little flip again at the sight of him. "Good morning," he said, offering his arm. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," Zelda said, taking his arm and trying not to blush. "You clean up pretty well yourself." They walked together through town, drawing a few curious glances from locals. Gabe told her about his week at the ranch, about the horses he had been working with, and the foreman who had already hinted that Gabe was promotion material if he kept up the good work. Zelda told him about her shop, and Gabe insisted on seeing it immediately. When she unlocked the door and showed him inside, he looked around with genuine admiration. "This is wonderful, Zelda. You did all this in less than a week." Martha Collins helped, Zelda admitted. "She lent me some fabric samples and gave me advice on pricing. She has been so kind." "You are going to do great here," Gabe said with absolute certainty. "I can feel it." They had lunch at the hotel dining room, a modest meal of roast chicken and vegetables that was nevertheless better than anything either of them had eaten in weeks. They talked easily, the conversation flowing naturally from one topic to another. Other diners gave them approving looks. An older couple even stopped by their table to welcome them both to Lone Pine and say what a nice couple they made. After lunch, they walked to the edge of town where the hills began. There was a small grove of pine trees there, the ones that gave the town its name, and they sat in the shade talking for hours. Gabe told her more about his family, about his sister who wrote him letters full of news about her new life in San Francisco. Zelda told him about the garden she hoped to plant someday, about the little things that made her happy, like the smell of fresh bread and the sound of rain on a roof. "I feel like I have known you forever," Gabe said at one point, looking at her with wonder. "Is that strange?" "Not strange," Zelda said softly. "I feel the same way." As the sun began to set, Gabe walked her back to the boarding house. At the door, he took her hand gently in his. May I call on you again next Sunday? Yes, Zelda said, or sooner if you like. I will be at the shop most days getting things ready. I will stop by when I can, Gabe promised. The ranch is only about 5 miles out. I can ride in on my half-days. He squeezed her hand, and for a moment Zelda thought he might kiss her. But he simply smiled, tipped his hat, and headed back to where he had left his horse. Zelda watched him go, her heart full of a feeling she was almost afraid to name. Over the following weeks, Gabe and Zelda fell into a pattern. He would ride into town whenever he could, sometimes just for an hour, sometimes for a whole afternoon. He helped her move more furniture into the shop, built her shelves and a proper cutting table, even installed better locks on the doors and windows. In return, she mended his clothes, sewed him new shirts, packed him lunches when she knew he had a long day ahead. They attended church together every Sunday and became a familiar sight in town. People began referring to them as a couple, assuming they were courting, which of course they were. Mrs. Patterson told Zelda she had never seen two people more suited to each other. Martha Collins agreed, saying Gabe looked at Zelda like she hung the moon. But beyond what other people saw, there was a deeper connection growing between them. They learned each other's moods and habits. Zelda learned that Gabe got quiet when he was worried, that he liked his coffee black and strong, that he had a sweet tooth he tried to hide. Gabe learned that Zelda hummed when she was happy, that she had nightmares sometimes about her father, that she was far stronger than she looked. One evening about 2 months after they had met, Gabe came to town with something clearly on his mind. He found Zelda at the shop, working on a dress for one of the mine owner's daughters, her first real commission. "Can you take a break?" he asked. "I want to talk to you about something." Zelda set down her needle, her heart suddenly racing. Gabe sounded serious, almost nervous. "Of course. What is it?" Gabe took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign he was anxious. "I have been thinking a lot lately about the future. About what I want, where I am going. And Zelda, every time I think about the future, you are in it." Zelda's breath caught in her throat. "Gabe, let me finish," he said gently. "I know we have only known each other a few months, but I have never been more sure of anything in my life. I love you, Zelda. I love your strength and your kindness and your laugh. I love the way you look at the world, always seeing the beauty in things. I love who I am when I am with you." Tears were streaming down Zelda's face now, but she was smiling. "I love you too, so much it scares me sometimes." Gabe stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "Then marry me. I know I do not have much right now, just a job and some savings. But Tom Morrison promised me that foreman position in 6 months, and with my wages and your shop, we could make it work. We could build a life together. I want to wake up next to you every morning and come home to you every night. I want to plant that garden with you and watch our children play in it. I want everything, Zelda, as long as it is with you." Zelda was crying too hard to speak for a moment. When she finally found her voice, it came out as barely more than a whisper. "Yes, yes, I will marry you." Gabe let out a whoop of joy and swept her up in his arms, spinning her around until they were both dizzy and laughing. He set her down carefully and cupped her face in his hands. "May I kiss you, please?" Zelda breathed. Their first kiss was soft and sweet and perfect. Zelda felt like she was falling and flying at the same time, like every good thing she had ever dreamed of was suddenly within reach. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Gabe rested his forehead against hers. "I am going to make you so happy," he promised. "I swear it." "You already do," Zelda said. They decided to wait 3 months before getting married, wanting to save a bit more money and make proper preparations. Zelda wanted a simple ceremony but a real one, with a nice dress and friends in attendance. Gabe wanted to have a little house ready for them, even if it was small. He started working extra hours when he could, saving every penny. The news of their engagement spread through Lone Pine like wildfire. Mrs. Patterson cried happy tears and insisted on making the wedding cake. Martha Collins offered to help Zelda with her wedding dress, teaching her some special techniques for delicate lacework. Even Tom Morrison seemed pleased, telling Gabe that a married man made a more stable foreman. Those 3 months flew by in a whirlwind of preparation. Zelda's shop began to take off, with more and more women coming in for dresses and alterations. She hired a young girl named Sophie to help with the simpler tasks, giving herself more time to focus on complicated orders. The money was not flooding in, but it was steady, and Zelda felt proud every time she deposited her earnings at the bank. Gabe was promoted to foreman a month early, impressing Tom Morrison with his skill in breaking a particularly difficult horse. The promotion came with a significant raise and a small house on the ranch property. It was nothing fancy, just 3 rooms and a porch, but it had good bones and a plot of land perfect for a garden. Gabe spent every spare moment fixing it up, repairing the roof, replacing broken windows, building furniture for the kitchen. 2 weeks before the wedding, Gabe took Zelda out to see the house. She fell in love with it immediately. It was small but cozy, with good light and a view of the mountains in the distance. The land around it was mostly dirt right now, but Zelda could already imagine it full of flowers and vegetables. "We can plant in the spring," Gabe said, watching her walk around the property. "Anything you want. Tomatoes, squash, beans, corn. Roses for sure, you have to have roses." "It is perfect," Zelda said, meaning it. "We are going to be so happy here." The wedding took place on a crisp October morning. The church was filled with people, more than Zelda had expected. It seemed half the town had turned out to witness Gabriel Lawson and Zelda Coleman exchange vows. Zelda wore a cream-colored dress that she and Martha had worked on for weeks, with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Gabe wore a new suit that Zelda had made for him, dark blue that brought out his eyes. When the Reverend asked if anyone objected to the union, the silence was absolute. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the whole church erupted in applause. Gabe kissed Zelda thoroughly, earning hoots and hollers from some of the ranch hands in attendance. The celebration continued at the hotel, where Mrs. Patterson had organized a reception. There was food and music and dancing. Zelda danced with Gabe until her feet hurt, then danced some more. She felt like she was floating, like this could not possibly be real life. But it was real, blessedly real. She was married to a good man who loved her. She had a home and a business and friends. She had everything she had thought she would never have. As the sun set and the party wound down, Gabe and Zelda rode out to their little house in a wagon borrowed from the ranch. Someone had tied tin cans to the back, and they rattled merrily all the way home. Gabe carried Zelda over the threshold, both of them laughing, and closed the door behind them. Their first night as husband and wife was tender and nervous and wonderful. They learned each other in new ways, taking their time, laughing at awkward moments, whispering words of love and reassurance. Zelda had worried it might be frightening or painful, but with Gabe, it felt natural and right. He was patient and gentle, and by the time they finally fell asleep tangled together, Zelda felt like she had finally come home. The first year of their marriage was not without its challenges. Money was sometimes tight, especially in the winter when Zelda's shop was slower. There were disagreements about silly things, like how to arrange the furniture or whether they could afford to buy a milk cow. But they worked through everything together, learning to communicate, to compromise, to support each other even when things were hard. Gabe proved to be an excellent foreman, earning the respect of the men under him and the trust of Tom Morrison. He was fair but firm, and the ranch prospered under his management. He came home tired most days but never too tired to help Zelda with whatever she needed. Together they planted the garden in the spring, just as they had planned. Zelda spent her evenings weeding and watering while Gabe built a fence to keep the rabbits out. By summer, they had tomatoes and beans and squash, more than they could eat themselves. Zelda started canning, filling the small pantry with jars of preserves and pickles. She also planted an herb garden near the kitchen door, rosemary and thyme and basil. The roses Gabe had planted climbed up the porch, filling the air with their sweet scent. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Zelda realized she had missed her monthly bleeding. She had been so busy with the shop and the garden that she had not paid much attention. But now, counting back, she was nearly 6 weeks late. A flutter of excitement and fear went through her. "Gabe," she said carefully, "I think I might be pregnant." Gabe's head snapped around, his eyes wide. "Really? Are you sure?" "Not completely, but I am late, and I have been feeling a bit queasy in the mornings. I am going to see the doctor tomorrow to be certain, but I think so." Gabe pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "A baby," he breathed. "We are going to have a baby." The doctor confirmed it the next day. Zelda was indeed pregnant, about 6 weeks along, and if all went well, they would have a baby in late winter or early spring. Gabe was beside himself with joy. He immediately started making plans, talking about building a cradle and adding another room to the house. Zelda laughed at his enthusiasm but felt her own excitement growing. A baby. Their baby. The pregnancy was not easy. Zelda was sick for the first 3 months, barely able to keep food down. She had to cut back on her hours at the shop, letting Sophie take on more responsibilities. Gabe worried constantly, hovering over her until she had to shoo him away. But gradually, the sickness passed, and Zelda began to feel better. Her belly swelled, and she felt the first flutters of movement around Christmas. "There," she said one evening, grabbing Gabe's hand and pressing it to her stomach. "Did you feel that?" Gabe's face lit up with wonder as he felt the baby kick. "That is our child," he said, his voice full of awe. "Our son or daughter right there." Winter was hard that year. Heavy snows kept Gabe close to home, which he did not mind since he wanted to be near Zelda. He finished the cradle and started on a rocking chair. Zelda sewed tiny gowns and blankets, her heart full every time she thought about the baby who would wear them. They talked endlessly about names, finally settling on James for a boy and Margaret for a girl, both after parents they had lost. The baby came on a freezing night in February. Zelda's water broke just after dinner, and Gabe rode through the snow to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Harding. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Gabe paced outside the bedroom, feeling useless and terrified every time he heard Zelda cry out. Finally, just as dawn was breaking, he heard a different sound. A baby's wail, strong and angry. Mrs. Harding opened the door, beaming. "You have a son, Mr. Lawson, and your wife did beautifully." Gabe rushed into the room to find Zelda propped up against the pillows, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. She looked up as he entered, tears streaming down her face. "Gabe, come meet your son." The baby was red and wrinkled and absolutely perfect. He had a dusting of dark hair and Zelda's delicate features. As Gabe gently touched the tiny hand, the baby's fingers wrapped around his, and Gabe felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "Hello, James," he whispered. "Welcome to the world, son." Those first few weeks with a newborn were exhausting. James was colicky, crying for hours at a time for no apparent reason. Zelda was recovering from the birth and learning to nurse. Gabe helped as much as he could, walking the floor with James at 2 in the morning, singing off key lullabies that sometimes worked and sometimes did not. But even through the exhaustion, they were happy. Their little family felt complete. As spring arrived and the snow melted, life began to settle into a new rhythm. Zelda gradually returned to work at the shop, bringing James with her in a basket. Customers cooed over him, and Sophie proved to be a natural with babies, happy to hold him when Zelda needed both hands free. Gabe came into town whenever he could to see them, stealing a few minutes to hold his son and kiss his wife. James grew quickly, hitting all his milestones right on time. He smiled at 6 weeks, laughed at 3 months, and was trying to crawl by 6 months. He was a happy baby, curious about everything, always reaching for new things. Gabe was a devoted father, never too tired to play with his son or read him stories. Zelda watched them together and felt her heart might burst from love. When James was 9 months old, Zelda discovered she was pregnant again. This time, the news was met with slightly less surprise but no less joy. They had always wanted multiple children, though they had not planned for them to be quite so close in age. But as Gabe said, sometimes the best things in life are the ones you do not plan. This pregnancy was easier than the first. Zelda was not nearly as sick, and she knew what to expect. She also had Sophie, who had become more than an employee, practically a younger sister. Sophie helped with James and the shop, giving Zelda time to rest when she needed it. Their second child, a daughter they named Margaret Rose, was born on a beautiful October afternoon. Unlike James's difficult entry into the world, Margaret slipped into life easily as if she could not wait to be there. She had Gabe's green eyes and a cap of blonde hair, and she was tiny, almost delicate looking. Where James had been a fussy baby, Margaret was peaceful, content to simply observe the world around her. "You gave me one of each," Gabe said, holding Margaret while James toddled around their feet. "I am the luckiest man alive," Zelda agreed. Looking around at her family, at the home they had built together, at the life they were living, she felt overwhelmed with gratitude. 5 years ago, she had been alone and desperate, her wagon broken down in the middle of nowhere. And then Gabe had appeared, like an answer to a prayer she had not known to make. The years that followed were full and rich. Gabe continued to excel as foreman, eventually becoming a partner in the Rusty Spur Ranch when Tom Morrison decided to semi-retire. The partnership meant more responsibility but also more security and a larger share of the profits. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, able to afford small luxuries and to save for their children's futures. Zelda's shop grew as well. She took on another seamstress when Martha Collins finally retired completely, and she began making not just everyday dresses but special occasion gowns. Women came from neighboring towns to have Zelda make their wedding dresses and ball gowns. She developed a reputation for quality work and fair prices. James grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved animals and books in equal measure. He followed his father around the ranch whenever he could, learning to ride and rope and work cattle. He was gentle with the animals, patient in a way that reminded Zelda of Gabe. He also loved school, soaking up knowledge like a sponge, and talked about maybe becoming a veterinarian someday. Margaret was her opposite in many ways. She was bold and fearless, always climbing things she should not climb and asking questions that made adults uncomfortable. She had no interest in sewing or cooking but loved being outside, loved helping her father with the horses, loved getting dirty. Zelda worried about her sometimes, about how she would fit into a world that expected girls to be quiet and demure. But Gabe just laughed and said Margaret was perfect exactly as she was. When James was 7 and Margaret was 6, Zelda became pregnant again. This third pregnancy came as a surprise, as they had thought they were done having children. But the surprise quickly turned to joy. Another baby to love, another child to raise. They added yet another room to the house, which was becoming quite sprawling now, and prepared to expand their family once more. The baby, another boy they named Thomas after Gabe's father, was born without complications on a spring morning. He was chubby and cheerful from day one, always smiling, always happy. James and Margaret adored their little brother, fighting over who got to hold him or help feed him. The house was loud and chaotic and full of love. As the children grew, Gabe and Zelda made a point to keep their own relationship strong. They still had weekly date nights, leaving the children with Mrs. Patterson or Sophie so they could have dinner alone or take a walk. They talked about everything, their hopes and fears, their dreams for the future. They laughed together, argued sometimes, but always made up. The passion that had drawn them together in the beginning never faded, tempered now with deep friendship and understanding. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Gabe took Zelda back to the spot where her wagon had broken down all those years ago. It had taken some navigation to find it, as the area had changed and they had to rely on landmarks and memory. But they finally found the place, a nondescript patch of scrubland that looked no different from any other. "Right here," Gabe said, dismounting and helping Zelda down. "This is where I first saw you." Zelda looked around, remembering that day, how scared she had been, how alone. "I thought my life was over," she said softly. "I thought I had made a terrible mistake, that I would die out here in the desert with nothing to show for my life. And instead, you found everything," Gabe said, pulling her close. "We found each other." "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had taken a different route that day?" Zelda asked. "If you had been an hour earlier or later?" Gabe shook his head. "I do not believe in coincidence. I think we were always supposed to find each other. Maybe not here, maybe not that day, but somehow, somewhere. We were meant to be." Zelda turned in his arms to face him. "I love you so much, more now than I did then, if that is possible. You have given me a life I never dreamed I could have." "You gave it to yourself," Gabe corrected. "I just got lucky enough to be part of it, and I love you too, more than words can say. You are my partner, my best friend, the love of my life. Everything good I am is because of you." They kissed there in the desert, in the spot where their story had begun, and Zelda thought about how strange and wonderful life was, how a broken wagon wheel had led to a love story, to a marriage, to a family, how the worst moment of her life had turned into the best. As the years continued to pass, life brought both joys and sorrows. Tom Morrison died peacefully in his sleep at 78, leaving his portion of the ranch to Gabe completely. Gabe was heartbroken, as Tom had been like a father to him, but he honored the older man's memory by continuing to run the ranch with the same integrity Tom had shown. Mrs. Patterson also passed away, and Zelda wept for days, having lost someone who had been like a mother to her. But life continued, as it always does, and there were happy times too. James went off to college in Denver to study veterinary medicine, making his parents proud with his dedication and intelligence. Margaret, true to her nature, announced at 16 that she wanted to join a Wild West show and learn to be a trick rider. It took some convincing, but Gabe eventually agreed to let her apprentice with a retired show rider who lived 2 towns over, on the condition that she complete her schooling first. Thomas, now 10, was still figuring out what he wanted, but he showed a talent for woodworking and spent hours in the little workshop Gabe had built for him. Gabe and Zelda aged gracefully, their hair going gray, their faces showing the lines of a life well lived. They were still deeply in love, still reaching for each other in the night, still laughing at private jokes. They had built something lasting, something beautiful. A family, a legacy, a love that had weathered every storm. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Zelda leaned her head on Gabe's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night we camped together, about wanting to build something that lasts?" "I remember," Gabe said, taking her hand. "You did it," Zelda said. "We did it. This ranch, our children, our love, it will last long after we are gone." "I hope so," Gabe said. "That is all anyone can hope for, really. To leave the world a little better than we found it, to love and be loved, to make a difference, even a small one." "You made a difference to me," Zelda said. "You saved me that day in more ways than one. I do not know if I ever properly thanked you for that." Gabe kissed the top of her head. "You thank me every day just by being you, by loving me, by building this life with me." "I was lost before I met you, Zelda. I was just drifting, looking for something I could not name. And then there you were, with your broken wagon and your determined expression. And suddenly, I knew exactly what I had been looking for." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. In the distance, they could hear Thomas hammering away at something in his workshop. The garden was full of late summer vegetables, the roses still blooming along the porch rail. It was an ordinary evening, the kind they had shared hundreds of times before. But it was also extraordinary because they were sharing it together. As the years went on, their children grew into adults and started families of their own. James married a sweet woman named Alice and opened a veterinary practice back in Lone Pine, eager to be close to his family. They had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and James was as devoted a father as Gabe had been. Margaret did join a Wild West show for a few years, traveling the country and thrilling audiences with her riding skills. She eventually settled down with a fellow performer, a sharpshooter named Daniel, and they bought a small ranch in Colorado where they raised horses and 4 rowdy children. Thomas stayed closest to home, taking over much of the day-to-day running of the ranch as Gabe slowly stepped back. He married a local girl, a schoolteacher named Alina, and they had twin daughters who were the light of everyone's lives. The ranch house was often full of grandchildren, running and playing and filling the air with laughter. Gabe and Zelda watched their family grow with pride and joy. They were grandparents now, then eventually great-grandparents. Their love story became something of a legend in Lone Pine, the tale of the stranded woman and the cowboy who stopped to help her. Young couples would sometimes ask them for advice, and Gabe always said the same thing. "Find someone who makes you want to be better," he would say. "Someone who sees all your flaws and loves you anyway. Someone who will work beside you when times are hard and celebrate with you when times are good. Love is not just a feeling, it is a choice you make every single day. Choose wisely and then keep choosing that person, over and over again." Zelda would add, "And do not be afraid to take chances. If I had been too scared to accept Gabe's help that day, if I had been too proud or suspicious, I would have missed out on everything good in my life. Sometimes the best things come when you are brave enough to be vulnerable, to accept help, to open your heart even when it is scary." On their 50th wedding anniversary, the whole family gathered for a celebration. The ranch house was bursting at the seams with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. There was food and music and dancing, just like at their wedding so many years ago. Gabe and Zelda, both in their 70s now, danced together slowly, holding each other close. 50 years, Zelda marveled. "How did that happen?" "One day at a time," Gabe said. "And I would do every single one of them again. Even the hard days, the sad days, the days we argued or struggled. I would choose you every time, Zelda." "And I would choose you," Zelda said, tears slipping down her wrinkled cheeks. "Always you." As the party went on around them, they slipped away to the porch where they had spent so many evenings. The view was the same as it had always been: mountains in the distance, the garden below, the vast New Mexico sky above. But everything else had changed. They had changed, grown, built this incredible life together. "You think we have done all right?" Zelda asked. "Do you think we have lived a good life?" Gabe thought about everything they had been through. The struggles and triumphs, the losses and gains, the ordinary moments and extraordinary ones. He thought about their children, good people all of them, raising good children of their own. He thought about the ranch, prospering and providing jobs for dozens of families. He thought about Zelda's shop, which she had only recently sold to Sophie, now a middle-aged woman herself with daughters learning the trade. He thought about the friends they had made, the community they were part of, the love that had sustained them through everything. "Yes," he said simply, "I think we have done more than all right. I think we have done beautifully." Zelda smiled and took his hand. They sat together in the gathering darkness, two people who had found each other against all odds and had built something lasting and true. They had started with nothing but hope and determination and love, and they had created a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. Their story, which had begun with a broken wagon wheel on a dusty desert road, had become something epic in its own quiet way. Not epic in the sense of great battles or adventures, but epic in the way that matters most. A love that endured, a family that flourished, a life well lived. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Gabe squeezed Zelda's hand. "Thank you," he said softly. "For what?" "For saying yes. For taking a chance on a stranger. For building this life with me, for everything." Zelda lifted their joined hands and kissed his knuckles, gnarled now with age and work but still strong. "Thank you for stopping, for not riding past that broken wagon, for seeing me, really seeing me and loving what you saw." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of their family inside, the laughter and conversation and life. This was their happily ever after, not perfect but real and rich and full of love. They had faced hardships and heartaches, but they had faced them together. They had celebrated joys and triumphs, and they had celebrated them together. They had built a home, raised children, created a legacy, and they had done it all together. That was the real fairy tale, Zelda thought. Not a prince on a white horse or a magical rescue, but two people choosing each other, day after day, year after year. Two people working side by side to build something beautiful out of the raw materials of life. Two people who had started as strangers on a desert road and had become each other's everything. As they sat together under the stars, Gabe and Zelda knew they had been blessed beyond measure. Their love story had started with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy stopping to help a stranded woman. But it had grown into something magnificent, something that would echo through generations. Their children would tell their children about the day Grandpa Gabe fixed Grandma Zelda's wagon and asked to court her. And those children would tell their children, and the story would become part of the family legend, a reminder that love can be found in the most unexpected places, and that sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to stop and help another. Years later, when Gabe passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Zelda grieved deeply, but also with gratitude for the life they had shared. She lived for another 3 years, surrounded by family, still sharp and engaged until the very end. When she died at 85, her children and grandchildren knew she had been ready, eager to be reunited with her beloved Gabe. They were buried side by side in the lone pine cemetery, their headstones simple but elegant. Beneath their names and dates, the inscription read, "Together they built a love that lasted." And it had. Through 53 years of marriage and beyond, their love had been the foundation upon which everything else was built. It had sustained them through hardships and multiplied their joys. It had been the greatest adventure of their lives. The ranch continued under Thomas's capable management, eventually passing to his daughters and then to their children. Zelda's shop had changed hands several times but was still operating in Lone Pine, still known for quality work and fair prices. James's veterinary practice was taken over by one of his sons. Margaret's children continued her legacy, several of them involved in rodeo and horse training. The family stayed close, gathering for holidays and special occasions, always remembering the love story that had started it all. On what would have been Gabe and Zelda's 60th wedding anniversary, the family made a pilgrimage to the spot where they had first met. It took some searching, as the area had developed over the years, but they finally found the place, marked now with a small stone cairn that someone had built years ago. The whole family was there, 4 generations, all descended from that chance meeting on a desert road. Thomas, now an old man himself, told the story to the youngest generation, the great-great-grandchildren who had never met their ancestors but knew them through stories. He told about the broken wagon, the passing cowboy, the immediate connection. He told about the courtship and the wedding, about building a life together, about love that lasted through every challenge. They were just ordinary people, Thomas said, his voice growing thick with emotion. Nothing special about them individually, but together they were extraordinary. They loved each other fiercely and completely, and they built a family and a legacy that continues today. Every one of us exists because Grandpa Gabe decided to stop and help a stranded woman, because Grandma Zelda was brave enough to say yes when he asked to court her, because they chose love over and over again every day of their lives together. The family stood together in the New Mexico sun, on the spot where it had all begun, and remembered. They remembered 2 people who had found each other against all odds, who had taken a chance on love and had been rewarded with a lifetime of happiness, who had proven that sometimes the most extraordinary things grow from the simplest beginnings. And in the desert air, if you listened very carefully, you might have heard the echo of laughter, the sound of 2 voices joined in conversation, the whisper of a love that transcended time and death. Gabe and Zelda's story had ended, but the love they had created lived on, passed down through generations, a testament to the power of kindness, courage, and commitment. Their legacy was not wealth or fame, but something far more valuable. It was a family that loved each other, a community they had served, a life well lived. It was the memory of 2 people who had found each other on a dusty road in New Mexico territory in 1873 and had built something beautiful together. It was proof that true love exists, that it can last, that it can overcome any obstacle if 2 people are willing to work for it. And so the story ends where it began, in the New Mexico desert, with a love that started with a simple act of kindness and grew into something magnificent. Gabe and Zelda's journey together was complete, their story told, their legacy secured. They had lived and loved and left the world better than they found it. They had built something that would last long after they were gone. They had proven that happily ever after is not a fairy tale but something real and attainable for those brave enough to reach for it. In the end, that is all any of us can hope for. To love and be loved. To build something meaningful. To leave behind more than we took. Gabe and Zelda did all that and more. Their broken wagon and passing cowboy story became a love for the ages, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. All it takes is an open heart, a willing spirit, and the courage to say yes to possibility. Their story proves that true love is not just something that happens to you, but something you create together, one day at a time, one choice at a time, one act of love at a time. And that is how a simple roadside repair became the foundation for a love story that would be remembered for generations to come.